So this video talking about managing data that we collect. And I've titled this Assessment 201. I'm actually presenting this at a conference in the next few days. And I think it's important that we recognize that so much of what we talk about when it comes to approaching assessment work is really at a basic level, and that's really what this class is geared toward, is helping you at a minimum understand the basics, but I also want to make sure that you have some perspectives on what hopefully they shouldn't seem like the next level, but in practice often do become the next level. And so we often start off in this perspective, I love data. We've got to get it all. We really get overzealous about collecting data. And so we send out surveys and we send out surveys, we send out more surveys. And next thing we know, we've experienced death by survey. We really go overboard. We send surveys to students on some campuses, it seems nonstop. Every time you turn around, some other office or department is sending out a survey to students. And everybody thinks they need to send a survey to every single student on campus to try to increase the number of responses that they receive. Well, if we were to actually think about things, we probably don't need all these surveys. So really, we've got to stop. And it's not that I'm anti-survey, but we're getting data, but we're not getting a lot of usable data. So for every survey request that we send out to students in particular, the response rates drop. So we have to think about, what do we do about this? And then also, when we send out all these surveys, even if we're getting decent response rates, chances are we're just stockpiling data. And so we've got to think about what to do with the data we have. And so we start by looking around our own department, our own office, and maybe within our own division, and determine what sources of data exist. Do we have survey data? Do we have data about participation or usage? Do we have student profile data? So think about the times when we send out a survey and it's linked to a student's M number. Well, that means if we're linking it to the M number, we ought to be able to get some of their profile data using that M number in cooperation with the registrar's office. Now, sometimes you might say, well, hey, I hear we've got this thing called Banner that we use to manage student information data, and we do. Okay, great. Why can't we use Banner to just like have this survey pull information from Banner? Well, Banner doesn't really work that way. And so what ends up happening, because there's no automatic button to press, we end up collecting student profile data again and again. Students are providing all this background information to us over and over, and there's this phenomenon known as survey fatigue. And it's not just because students are providing the same demographic information and profile data all the time. It's because they're getting so many requests. So went on a little tangent there, back to why we need to tone down the number of surveys that we send out. Another source of data, I mentioned this in the previous video, are policies. And I'm actually going to talk about looking at policies. I'm going to take a step back to go to last week and record a video about ethics. My computer died on me, and so was not able to get a video recorded for last week in time for you to have it for last week. So I'm going to go back and put that up there. In addition to policies, look at manuals or handbooks, meeting minutes, and all of these policies, manuals, handbooks, meeting minutes, this is all data about the work that we do. What do we do as a department? What do we do as a division? What do we do as an institution? These things also communicate what we value in our ethos. So it's important to look at these as sources of data. And we should also look at institutional studies. And by institutional studies, I mean external studies that we participate in through some other entity. So, for example, we as at Murray State participate in the National Survey of Student Engagement. This is coordinated out of a research collective at Indiana University in Bloomington. So we need to know what data we already have before we keep trying to go out and get more and more. And there are some ethical implications with holding on to data. One is concept of veracity. And generally, when we collect information, whether it's through a survey or we are requesting data from some other source, we generally, there's at least an implicit expectation and something is often communicated explicitly as well, that the information is going to be used to drive decision making and it's going to be used in a timely manner. So we want to make sure that we're using data that we have as close to the time that we collect as possible. So if we're collecting, let's say we administer a survey this year, well, we need to analyze and use that data this year for but maybe the impact will be for the next year. But we don't want to collect that information and then sit on it and either not do anything with it or do something with it in a way that's not timely. We also want to make sure that we respect the data that we have, because each piece of data is connected to a person. And we want to make sure that we are respectful of the people who entrust us to facilitate their experiences on campus and entrust us to make sound decisions about the institution. And so just a quote from Robert Louis Stevenson: "Truth in spirit, not truth to the letter, is the true veracity." And I like that quote because it reinforces for me that we want to make sure that we're able to instill a sense of trust through our assessment efforts. That when people provide us with data, that they trust that we're going to do something with it and use it properly and use it wisely. Again, there's such a thing as being too late with data and data analysis and using the data that we have. And we've got to keep calm and respect the data. And this is probably one of the last times I'm ever going to use one of these keep calm memes. I'm kind of tired of them. But it's become all too common that we end up sitting on data and become data hoarders. And I've been a part of it. I've helped create some data hoards, and because I got caught up in this trap of all I heard was we've got to have more data, got to have more data, and I was gathering information and gathering data, but not taking the time to really thoughtfully analyze it and produce some sort of report or something for decision makers to use it in a timely fashion. So we've got all this data, we've got to contemplate what exactly do we do with it? How do we manage it? So hopefully this looks familiar from the previous video. But you see it's modified. So the first question is the same. What is our question? What do we need to answer? We need to know why we need to answer that question. What type of data will answer it? And then, do we have existing data? And it's not that, oh, we just sent out the survey last year and we analyzed it. Let's just do it again so we don't send out another survey. It's more than just survey data. We want to make sure that we're making use of any data that we've collected and also data that we have at our disposal. So part of it almost becomes a bit of a scavenger hunt of determining who do I go to access data. In the case of Murray State, data is siloed in different departments when data exists. And so it becomes a little bit of a learning process. Okay, I know if I want data about characteristics of the incoming first year undergraduate class, I go talk to this person. If I want stats on job placement for graduating seniors, I talk to this other person. So it's about learning the campus. It can be a slow process to learn that, um, because oftentimes people are protective of the data that they have. Data represents, in some ways, like a security blanket for Linus on Charlie Brown. If we have data, and we control it individually, people have to come to us to get that data. But also, decision makers know that we have the information that they need. So part of this process is building trust with others, letting others know that they can trust you when you request data from them. So when we get data or we discover that we have data, we need to document what we have. So we need to identify the data source. We need to think through the questions that it can answer. And we need to really think critically and examine what forms of data or types of variables are represented. And then the answer to that question helps us understand the levels of analysis that will be available. And I'll talk through answering that when we cover analysis in the course. So speaking of analysis, and this is, to me, still part of the data management perspective, we want to make sure we're matching the analysis to the question. So we don't want to think, okay, I want to do a regression because that sounds really cool. I want to be able to predict things. Well, that's great. We have to make sure that the data we have lends itself to regression. We want to make sure that regression analysis would actually answer the question that we have in using that data. But then also, we don't want to just keep everything super simple by calculating means, because that's descriptive. That's great. Descriptive statistics have their place. But if our question goes beyond descriptive statistics, we need to engage in that further analysis. Maybe we want to explore differences between items or differences across groups, whatever it might be. And so this is just, I've made a longer table of this perspective as well for folks to use. And then we have to remember, we have to plan to make analysis happen. It's not going to happen just by chance. So that's why it's important why I asked you in your assessment plan to really think ahead. What are the analytic processes? What's it going to look like? Because you have to plan for it on the front end. And it's not just about running tests. So if you've got numeric data and you set up to run tests in some form of statistical analysis software, that's great. I can click around and spit out a bunch of outputs in SPSS, but I have to take the time to interpret them and then to share that interpretation through reporting mechanisms. So that's it for this video on data management.